Hey guys, okay, so I'm using Edpuzzle to make sure people are watching these videos, and if you know about math and how it's done there, I can see progress on videos. I can see who's watching and who's not, and I don't make them very long, maybe about 10 minutes a day or something, 4 days a week. So I'm going to be doing that for a grade for today's video, and it's important that you do watch these as quickly as possible. Don't let them pile up. Okay, so let's get some basics down. The Holocaust, by definition, it's also known as Shoah, is a genocide. Approximately 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. They had help as well. The word genocide is a deliberate killing of a large group of people, particularly those in a specific ethnic group or a nation. So it's a targeted group of people that are all the same in one way. Another word you hear a lot is anti-Semitism. And that is a prejudice or hatred, some sort of discrimination against Jews as a nation or an ethnic, religion, or racial group. So, we think of Jews as being religious, but as a group of a community as well. Okay, so let's look at this pie chart. Holocaust deaths, and you see that of the 6 million plus Jewish people that were killed, there's quite a bunch of different groups, subgroups in there, including Soviet. When they say Soviet, that means Russian. You can see Polish Jews. Wow, if you were a Jew in Poland, you had a pretty good chance of being wiped out. And then a whole bunch of other subgroups in there, and you can see that there are other countries mentioned as well. So here's the big plan for Hitler and the Jewish people. And we've talked about the first two steps already. Identify who is Jewish and where they live and take away their rights. Now that happened in Germany as well as any country that Germany took over. France and Belgium and part of Russia and obviously Poland, but other countries as well. Then the Jews were taken and put in separate areas and cities called ghettos. And I mentioned that earlier when I talked about why did Hitler hate the Jews. You can go back and take a look at that video. But then from those ghettos, while they were there, camps were being built. All right, concentration camps. So the third step is removal of Jews from the ghettos to the concentration camps. And then something called the final solution, which is the extermination of the Jewish people in large scale. So let's go to the ghettos and pick it up there. Liquidation means complete removal and destruction of those ghettos that people were living in. And here are some pictures. This one is pretty powerful. The Jewish people being led by Germans with machine guns and all sorts of stuff, being taken out of those city areas and being transported to the concentration camps. You can see people loaded on trucks here, and you can see that they're separated. Those are all male, well, mostly, and the children are not in there as well. Railroads were used extensively, and Jewish people were loaded onto trains, not passenger trains, cattle cars, and the doors were locked shut, and people in some cases were in there standing because there was no room to even sit. And the trains went on journeys to different parts of where Germany conquered and built these camps. So you can see that as well. Many didn't survive the train ride. They died of starvation, or in some cases they were sick and left in trains for sometimes days before they got to where they were. The concentration camps, and there were a lot of them. To say there were dozens wouldn't be saying enough. I think there were hundreds. Some of them were bigger than others, but they were all over. They were in Germany and in areas that Germany conquered. Now, when you went to a concentration camp, you were selected either to be a worker or to be killed in some cases. But most people were in these concentration camps workers as slaves for the Nazis. Up at 4 a.m. and bed at 8 p.m., working constantly on whatever projects they wanted. Just like jail, they took your photographs, they took your possessions and gave you uniforms, and that's what you were doing. And the idea was to work for the Nazis to help them with the war, and it was brutal. One of the things is they usually, they didn't care if people died during this, and one of the things that you had to have, and I have this slide right here, if you lost or damaged your shoes, you were as good as dead. Once your feet got blisters or were exposed and you couldn't walk and get out of bed, you were taken away. Now, unfortunately, at many of these camps, the Nazis didn't have a use for children, and the children were usually only allowed to live for medical experiments or other things. You can see a little baby right there with a tattoo on the arm. The tattoo is what was given to your identification. Instead of having you wear a number, they tattooed a number on you for life. The final solution comes as these camps are being filled. They start just mass killing. And groups of Germans called Einsatzgruppen were sent out to the areas where the camps were, and even where they had Jews that hadn't been transported to the camps, and just massacred people. And it was usually with machine guns and having people dig their own graves, and it's just some horrible stuff. And we do have some footage of that. Some of these pictures are horrible. People being shot and dumped in graves, and this is a, pretty shocking picture there of a woman holding her kid being both shot at the same time. Having people dig their own graves and then shooting them, just removing them. It's just disgusting. And we have a lot of that documented. And there are 4 or 5 women there that were told to take off most of their clothes and to go near an area where there was already a pre-dug grave, and just machine gunned. And it's hideous. Now, the ones that are the most notorious places to be sent to were the death camps. I'll do more of this tomorrow, but if you were sent to the death camps, these were designed to kill mass amounts of people at the same time. You can see here in this map major extermination camps, and where the arrows are pointing to are the notorious ones: Auschwitz, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka, Helmlo, and most of them were actually deep inside Poland. It was something that Hitler didn't want the German people to see, and Poland was, a newly conquered area where they could get away with building these gigantic, and they're not small, they're the size of prisons, even really large prisons. Auschwitz is the most notorious because of the number of people that were killed. And they had it done so methodically, like they were able to kill people so quickly. They even had the trains running into the camps themselves. And after a train ride, you can see in this picture here, they separated men and women into 2 different lines, and then what was called a selection. And they had doctors at the front of these lines. They would look at you for seconds. And if you looked like you couldn't be of any use to them working, they pointed in a certain direction and you lined up. And the people that were put in those lines during the selection that weren't useful to the Germans were not even tattooed. They were separated, and they were sent in line, and they were executed. So if you were allowed to live, you were tattooed like a prisoner at these death camps, but your days were numbered. And if you were allowed to live, you were put through what's called destruction through work. You were fed less than the amount of calories a person needs to keep their weight. And as you worked, you got skinnier and skinnier, and to the point of eventually just collapsing, and then a new train load would come in and they'd replace you with somebody else who could work. It's horrible. And we'll talk more about the camp experience tomorrow, but I just wanted you to get to this second part, from the ghetto area to the concentration camps. And some people never made it to the trains. They were wiped out in the ghettos, or they were killed in small towns. It was really a hideous thing, but we'll talk about Auschwitz tomorrow. Okay, so the way that I'm grading is watching this video and the one from yesterday. I'm going to put it together into a grade, and I can use Edpuzzle to see who's watching it. So, you can't skip through it, but this is your education. This is something that a lot of people need to know about, and this Holocaust that happened during World War II is something that we talk about a lot in New York State history. You'll see this again in social studies, grades 10 and probably a little more in grade 11. But I encourage you to investigate on your own as well. Okay. All right, guys, I'll continue this tomorrow.